Welcome to the Design Lecture Series, everyone. Today we have the pleasure of having Crystal Zapata here with us. And to give her introduction, Crystal is a graphic designer and artist based in Chicago. She, with an interest in material objects and image making, she utilizes a diverse array of disciplines to approach her design practice. Her clients include Apple, A24, Calvin Klein, St. Heron, Adidas, Nike, International Anthem, SSENSE, Ballroom Marfa, and Crack magazine. Her work has been recognized by the Type Directors Club, the Society of Typographic Arts, and the American Institute for Graphic Arts. We're very excited to have you here today, and without further ado, I'll let you take it away.
Well, first, thank you all for having me. It means a lot that all of you showed up to be here. Had a really nice day at Carnegie Mellon, so thank you for welcoming me here today. So I'm Crystal, and for the past 3.5 years, I've worked as an independent designer. I work with cultural institutions, brands, and collaborators in fashion and music to develop printed matter, identities, illustrations, and images. This is a picture of my studio where I work every day, but to start, I wanted to bring it back to the beginning. I have always had an obsession with culture. My dad, a dancer, and my mom, a graphic designer. I'm grateful to them for exposing me to art as a kid. But as a teen, I was always seeking something out online that I wasn't getting in physical reality. People with shared interests. It was exciting for me to go on MySpace and Tumblr and discover that there were communities of people who were dressing in ways that I felt excited about, or making art and music that was nothing like I had ever seen or heard before. And as a teen, it was a place to get excited about things on an aesthetic level, which had the potential to lead to deeper discovery. These are images that I found on my Tumblr from the early days of posting in like 2011, 2012. I also really love going to the bookstore to read fashion and music magazines and discover new things that way. This is Nylon magazine from 2008. I remember being really obsessed with nylon when I started high school in 2008, and I still have the first one that I bought, which happens to be the MySpace music issue. Every page has a weird shape cut out of it because I was obsessed with making collages. And I remember being on MySpace and hearing Offie for the first time when I was in middle school. I had never heard anything that sounded like it before, and it sparked a real curiosity in me. This was way before Instagram. And being a young person, how do you find a community of people who like the same music as you if you don't go to school with anybody who likes that music? You log online. The magazines and internet introduced me to aspects of culture that I didn't otherwise have access to at the time. It definitely made the world feel smaller. My attraction towards these things I was seeing online was really about being at the age where you begin to find yourself. And also learn how to express yourself through clothing or an artistic discipline. It was all really related to learning self-expression. And I watched a lot of Style.com fashion show reviews on my iPod Classic before going to bed at night, which exposed me to new ideas about dressing and the reasoning behind designers' creative choices. I began to understand inspiration in a new way and learn about the creative process on a professional level. This specific video is of Rodarte's spring 2011 ready-to-wear collection. Their work has really stayed with me since learning about it as a teen because of their interpretation of unexpected references. This show was inspired by the redwood forests and California beaches. Another one of their shows was inspired by Star Wars and X-rays. And the way that those things were translated in the clothes introduced me to a totally new way of thinking about making something. This is a picture of my bedroom floor at the end of high school. At the time, the thing I was most excited about was my art class. Going to college, I was really passionate about keeping that momentum. This is a picture of me in college. I went to school for graphic design, but I was interested and excited about so many other things. My school was a very it-is-what-you-make-it sort of place, and I think that a lot of the curriculum encouraged following a pretty traditional path to like working in advertising. I was determined to make the most of it and use the resources I had, like screen printing and the wood shop, the book bindery, sewing machines, and fabric printers. Really just trying to have some fun making work independent of the graphic design curriculum. I was very interested in materiality and had the resources to learn more about technical practices and material. In addition to my required coursework, I took furniture design, intro to sewing, printmaking, and bookbinding. I had a really good time in school experimenting and also met a few like-minded people, which is equally important in college. It was a valuable time for experimentation, and I created the space for myself to investigate a trajectory that would excite me. These are some chairs that I made just for fun while I was in college after learning how to use power tools. And during college, I had a string of internships at a nonprofit art gallery, a small PR firm, an event planning company, and lastly, an ad agency. This is a Google Maps screenshot of the building where I used to intern in downtown Chicago. And none of these really felt like the right fit for me personally. Graphic design is such a broad discipline, and I quickly learned about what the reality of working as one might entail. It was a valuable experience that helped me realize that getting a job at a small studio would be ideal. And I don't think I really knew that that was a possibility before doing all the other internships. I was never really exposed to the idea of working at a studio until later in college, when I started learning about practitioners who had cultivated a more niche studio practice. Well, except for maybe watching Helvetica as a teenager. So after graduating in 2016, I worked for Normal, a small studio in Chicago founded by Renata Groff and Alexa Vicious. Alexa left to open her own photo studio at the end of 2018, so the second iteration of Normal included Tim Curley, and Alexa actually photographed us at the Barcelona Pavilion in Spain, where we traveled to see one of our clients' exhibitions. And so Normal works closely with a lot of other design-conscious cultural institutions. They produce publications, identity systems, websites, and printed matter. Working there, I learned about the process of problem solving and a methodology for communicating ideas. Curiosity, play, and experimentation were all very integral to the design process, and the approach to work was intentional. Time for exploration was prioritized. And I feel really lucky to have spent 4 years at a studio that provided a space for me to learn and work closely with a team of similarly curious people. Having a good time was also important, and we used to go on annual trips to visit other designers and studios. It taught me the importance of work, but also making time to enjoy life and finding inspiration. And I think this sensibility really helped lay the foundation for me to hone a practice that would later allow me to work independently. This next section is called Looking. And so I've been reading The Artist's Way, and the author writes about the value and immense importance of paying attention. Julia Cameron says that the quality of life is in proportion always to the capacity for delight. The capacity for delight is the gift of paying attention. And I think about this in the context of my own work being that it is informed by so many different things, and how the attention that I pay to those other things rewards me with the ability to approach graphic design with a different perspective and context. One of my inspirations is Sister Frida Kent, an artist and educator known for her bold and vibrant silkscreen compositions. This is one of my favorites by her, called Daisy. So in 1947, she joined the faculty at Immaculate Heart College, where her unique methods of teaching gave students tools for new ways of seeing. So I'm going to read a quote from her book, Learning by Heart, where she describes a tool called a finder. There are, for our purposes now, 2 ways of looking: slow looking and fast looking. Slow looking is best done alone. Special equipment is helpful. A magnifying glass and a camera are useful tools. Charles Eames said that a camera should be as common a tool as a pencil, not just for recording, but for framing pictures and examining the details. You needn't have film in the camera for it to be a helpful implement for learning how to look and see. The lens frames a section, allowing us to pull all of our attention on that special area. Another tool for looking is a finder. This is a device which does the same thing as a camera lens or viewfinder. It helps take things out of context, allows us to see for the sake of seeing, and enhances our quick looking and decision-making skills. An instant finder is an empty 35mm slide holder, or you can make your own by cutting a rectangular hole out of a heavy piece of paper or cardboard, heavy enough so that it won't bend with constant use. You can then view life without being distracted. You can make visual decisions. In fact, they are made for you. And I think that the finders are a great tool to use to train oneself to pay attention to the details of everyday life. I think that it's a really nice way of attributing value to finding the joy in the everyday and appreciating ordinary things. Cameron says that art is born in attention, its midwife is detail. And Create provides a way to spend time with the details and recontextualize familiar things, to see them in a new way. She suggests that this can provide the seed from which creativity and larger discovery can grow. I don't usually talk this much, so my voice is like super dry. So one project I think perfectly exemplifies this sensibility is the catalog for seeing, which was an exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, curated by fashion designer Duro Oluwu. This is the last project that I worked on with Renata Grott Normal before leaving to pursue an independent practice. And the book is really about the reader entering Duro's world, the art that he's seen, the culture that he's experienced, the places he's been, and how the people around him influence his craft as a fashion designer. A great quote by Duro is, "Most of the time you collect with your eyes and store everything in your brain." The book attempts to capture Duro's aesthetic and process of seeing. It includes his iPhone photos, a rich mixture of patterned textiles from his own designs, archival images from 1960s MCA openings, works that were included in the exhibition, and photos of 1970s fashion and culture in Chicago. And I wanted to share this project after talking about Greet Against Finders and Julia Cameron's thoughts on attention, because I think it does a really great job of showing one person's way of seeing and a cute way of processing the world. This publication makes a point to show a lot of separate references and points of reference that contribute to and inspire a singular practice, pairing iPhone photos from everyday observations with his own textiles and famous works of art. There's no hierarchy to how the images appear, which really makes it feel like the reader gets to peek inside of Duro's brain, and that all of these sources equally contribute to his worldview. And I really relate to this book and the idea of collecting with one's eyes. I think that my own work ties into the same philosophy and adheres to the idea of drawing inspiration from and being influenced by a lot of different places, and namely those that bring me joy. This next section is called Slow Design. These are the cornerstones of what inspires me. There's a lot of overlap between these areas, and most of my projects touch on two or more of each thing. I want to sort of just go through each area and talk about some points of reference that have inspired my work. I want to mainly discuss dance, craft, music, and making things by hand. Community is really interwoven throughout most of these projects, and overall I think that nature is probably what I draw from the most, both spiritually but also on an aesthetic level. So first I wanted to talk about dance. I took dance classes when I was a kid, up until I was about 18 or so. It left me with a spatial sensibility that has stayed with me and has persisted in my work as a designer. I like to think that entering any space is sort of a dance by nature, and one's understanding of space determines your interactions with the environment. choreographer Carol Brown said that dance and architecture have much in common. Both are concerned with practices of space. For a dancer, the act of choreography as a writing of place occurs through the unfolding of spatial dimensions through gesture and embodied body movement. For the architect, space is the medium through which form emerges and habitation is constructed. For both, the first experienced space is the space of the body. And choreographers have their own systems for movement notation to illustrate a sequence of positions and motions. The space in which the choreography occurs becomes a blank page. A composition is built as representations of movement are added. And in the medium of graphic design, a blank page is also a space. Like any situation that involves the body or an environment, the space of the empty page is experienced too. And much like design, dance is also a technical practice that is constantly in balance with personal flourishes of expression. At the base level, design is mathematical and must communicate, and the technical aspects are in balance with embellishment and aesthetic decisions. The foundation of dance is understanding one's body and how to control it, while the fundamentals of graphic design are concerned with the grid, proportion, and a harmonious relationship between the elements on a page. These two images represent those foundational elements of each discipline, and I think it's interesting to think about the strategies meant to enhance creativity that build on the technical aspects of a practice. Improvisational Technologies by William Forsythe does this exactly. It's a series of videos originally developed to train his dance company. It offers a toolkit of techniques, namely methods to explore and manipulate lines, shapes, and forms using the body as the medium and the space around the body as the composition to be filled. He defines each of these techniques as modalities, some examples being imagining lines, shearing, and extruding. These techniques are informed by geometry and also mirror terms found in design vocabulary. These tools use traditional ballet technique as a foundation and build upon that knowledge to stimulate different thinking around how to evoke the improvisation of new movement. He reframes the thinking around movement and creates new possibilities through his prompts. The description of the original CD-ROM instructional video describes these movements as a formal drawing with the body in space. The container for a dance is a space, and for design, it's the page. So dance inspires my practice both literally and metaphorically. From 2017 to 2020, I designed posters for a bi-weekly dance party in Chicago called Bricktown Sound. The exercise of reinventing the poster for the same party twice a month provided room to investigate and understand my design process. There are really endless approaches to iterating on the same concept, and I think that Forsythe's methodology for reinventing a process for movement relates to the approach that I took for these posters. Each one was an opportunity to explore a new technique or concept, and I used it as an outlet for experimentation. Like Forsythe's toolkit of movement concepts, I built a toolkit for different conceptual and technical approaches, which provided me with guidelines and context for accessing a new process and language for producing work. This toolkit consisted of a few different approaches that acted as avenues for expressing my interest in other disciplines. I actually need to plug my computer because it's running out of battery.
There's an outlet right underneath you.
I see it, thank you. So one example being the direct reference to Forsythe by using the body as a tool, and drawing from improvisational technologies, writing in space and illustrating typography through motion. tracing the letter S in the air and using movement as a typographic medium. I injected the action and energy of the party into the actual method for creating a visual to represent it. Here, the byproduct of movement functions as a compositional element. I also used paint to evoke the energy and atmosphere of the party, and also used oil pastels to achieve something similar, but in a new medium. The exercise of using analog tools and working outside of the screen really opened up my understanding of using digital design in tandem with a more organic medium. I explored alternative surfaces for presenting information. A poster isn't defined by the medium that it takes on, rather its ability to communicate. So what if the material structure of a poster contributed to its meaning? The application of typography to an object transforms its function to not only perform its original use, but to also deliver information. And here we have an envelope, which is typically the container for an invitation or letter. It instead functions as the primary surface for communication. How can the substrate of a poster enhance language? I also explored objects with a relationship to the setting of the party itself. A napkin like you might get with your drink at the bar. The 420 iteration of the poster was printed onto rolling paper. And pulling something off of the screen and bringing it into reality allowed me to gain a new perspective. I explored the interplay of my work and saw new possibilities for an otherwise straightforward composition. I was designing these posters while I was still working full-time at my studio job, but these really gave me the space to build the foundation of my independent practice and gave way to the development of my individual voice and approach, which consisted of this new toolkit and philosophy that built on my previous knowledge of design, but really resulted from these experiments. It opened up the medium for me and determined my approach for imbuing future projects with meaning and a sense of myself. Another inspiration of mine is craft. I've always had a very hands-on approach to the things that I make, ever since I was a kid, but since I've been practicing as a graphic designer professionally, I've drawn inspiration from a lot of practices that fall under the craft umbrella. I appreciate craft and folk art because often the outcome of these pursuits is something that serves a functional purpose but also tells a story. And I think that craft is also unfortunately thought of as inferior to fine art, i.e. painting and sculpture, but I strongly disagree with that sentiment. It feels like an integral part of history, community, and femininity. Meticulous activities like sewing, quilting, and weaving have been historically undervalued and called women's work, but these activities and objects possess a great amount of cultural significance and provide me with inspiration and knowledge that allows me to approach my own practice with more intention. I believe that there's immense value in a slow approach to work that requires time, that you can't rush. That idea is completely at odds with the demands of contemporary design, the contemporary design landscape, but I don't really care about making things quickly. And I believe that nothing can replace the humanity of somebody's hand. So I found this quilting book at a thrift store near my studio. It's a guide on how to translate symbols and images into quilting patterns. I've recently become really obsessed with quilts. I love the idea of imbuing a functional object with meaning. A quilt uses disparate pieces of cloth from different sources and recycles those pieces into a new role. Garments that are no longer wearable, old household textiles, or scraps from another sewing project. The quilt takes on the lives of the fabric from which it's constructed. The American piece quilt, which in the 19th century morphed into the familiar block-style quilt, was pieced block by block, and then sewn together. It was a style that suited the young America. No block was more important than any other, and all were needed to form a unified whole. This technique spawned a new artistic freedom. That's a quote from episode 1 of Why Quilts Matter, and I love this idea that each block was of equal importance, and was required for the quilt structure. I love these quilts that use letters and numbers, especially the one that's personalized, which I think was a wedding quilt. And the Library of Congress is also a really amazing resource for learning about and looking at quilts. There are a lot of photographs of ordinary people with their work, and I love that these moments have been memorialized. I especially love when the images are from communities in Chicago. This is a quilt by Mary Lee Bendolph, who was a part of the Gee's Bend Collective in Alabama. Many of the quilters there are descendants of enslaved people. Her quilting fabric was made from used clothing in appreciation of the love and spirit of old cloth. I love the more abstract approach to the shapes in this quilt. This is also by Gee's Bend quilter Mary L. Bennett, who came from a family of quilt makers. I love the use of color and shape here, and that it wasn't made from a specific pattern. All of the Gee's Bend quilts have a very unique look. This has the look and feel of a modernist painting. It's a beautiful object, but is also imbued with familial history, provenance, and skill that has been passed down from generations of ancestors. I just wanted to show a few. There's like truly an endless amount of quilts to look at. Sometimes I'll even go on eBay and look at quilts that people have made or are selling just for fun. These are scanned pages from the book that I found. They're patterns for letters and numbers that are almost like proto-pixel typography. And understanding how to create a legible character by using a bunch of smaller shapes, each playing an important role in forming the figure. These quilting patterns reminded me of the beautiful illustrations of Susan Kerr, who designed icons for early Apple computers. Instead of each grid square representing a piece of fabric, they represent pixels. Last year I was approached by Nike to redesign the basketball court of the Southside YMCA in Chicago. I was really inspired by quilting when conceptualizing the imagery for the court, using this idea of bringing parts together to create a collective whole as a central theme. I wanted to include familiar symbols that carry positive meaning, and also develop a typeface that could represent the bonds and community around the YMCA. This is a crop scan of the number 8 from the quilting book. And I drew upon the patterns of quilted lettering to create a typeface that used individual squares to construct each letter. I thought it was a really nice metaphor for community. And then added rounded corners to the interiors of each letter to soften its presence. Here's the full set of numerals. And the type itself fits into this larger idea of unifying these symbols and images. It meant a lot to me to be able to design a permanent space in Chicago and see kids in the community gathering and building relationships there. Each person, the kids, instructors, YMCA staff, is an important piece of the community makeup. And I would like to think that, like a quilt being passed down to different members of a family, this space will provide a use for many people and many years to come. I also designed t-shirts, a storage shed, some tote bags, and heat press graphics. It was a really beautiful and inspiring project to be a part of. Another thrift store find. Found this at a thrift store in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's an instructional guide on how to weave baskets. The other aspect of craft that I really love is that these activities have been a part of humanity for a really long time. Therefore, the knowledge on how to make something like a basket is readily available, belongs to no one person, and has been iterated on by generations of people and cultures, and can be practiced by everybody. There's also a beautiful sense of community in these images. I think that the time spent performing the repetitive motion of weaving is a really integral part of the activity. Taking the time to create objects that enhance one's life and potentially making a basket with a friend is a really inspiring approach to creating. This is one of my favorite images that I've made, which accompanies an interview for SSENSE with Carla Cornejo Villavicencio, author of The Undocumented Americans. She speaks about her own life and the experiences of undocumented individuals working in America. And throughout the process, she took notes by hand instead of using a recorder and destroyed them after completing her book. There's a relationship between this idea of self-preservation and her method of note-taking, destroying the notes not only for protection, but also to preserve the energy and individuality of each person. She embedded these people into her writing as they were embedded into her life. And so I made a paper weaving to represent the many narratives that have built a more holistic document of, as the New York Times put, stories that are largely absent from modern journalism and literature. She weaves these accounts of undocumented life into the fabric of history. Here's a photo of the actual paper weaving, which is a great example of the inspiration that a craft like basket weaving provides. I think that there's value in learning the discipline and patience required to make something by hand. In an article about the work of architect George Nakashima, author Michael Snyder wrote, "Ultimately, the work of craft is the work of looking, a last bulwark against carelessness." So this project draws on craft, but was also for a craft school. It was cool to work on a project for a discipline that inspires me so much. I was asked to create a logo for the School of Many Questions, which is a studio and craft school. They host workshops on things like candlestick making and caning. And I began to think about the way in which they structured their method of teaching and the materials at play. The process of learning a new skill and configuring that knowledge into a physical output felt like a really nice metaphor for how the logo could function. So the logo uses modularity to configure individual building blocks into a spiral. It represents the foundational elements that open up to a path of inquiry. Also, just thinking about the malleability of a material like wood, the question mark is the path itself, acting as one holistic form or two separate parts, both representing growth and process. And I love this project because I not only feel connected to it conceptually, but it was also made for friends. The two images on the sides are from a chair building workshop that they hosted at my friend and neighbor Mary Eleanor's space called Tuss. It's special to feel connected to the work on this level and collaborating with friends and also being able to draw from the deep inspiration that craft provides. So next section, music. I'm going to start with a video that had a really huge influence on me as a young person. It might be kind of loud, so.
That's how you make your
This video blew my mind when I first saw it, and I'm of course connecting the dots between my enthusiasm for these visuals as a high schooler and my eventual career as a graphic designer. I think it really just goes to show how visually rich music was in this era, and I really could talk about music visuals forever, but I think my professional trajectory was heavily influenced by my passion for music, a medium that really feels all-encompassing. It's always felt like my main access point to culture, and growing up in the suburbs, digging into MySpace and Tumblr to find out about new music and shows, taking the train to see my favorite bands with a couple of friends who like similar music. Nothing can really compare to the level of excitement that's possible when you're discovering things as a young person. And these are some albums that were very influential for me as a teen. I think it was the first time that I really felt a part of something, and also when I began to build a repository of imagery that inspired me. And it's pretty amazing to just show up somewhere where everyone is connected by their love for the music being played. These photos are from over 10 years ago. Music now acts as the glue that keeps me connected to a lot of people in my community in Chicago, and really provided the foundation for my independent practice. Early in my freelance days, I worked on design for a lot of friends' music projects as a result of making posters for Bricktown, and it's how I started to build up collaborators that eventually exposed me to clients outside of my community. And the emotional resonance is such an important aspect of music, and I think it makes it one of the most powerful and unifying art forms there is. That's why it always feels so precious to create imagery to pair with someone's music. My partner is a musician and has also become a really close collaborator. He is similarly interested in the slow process of layering analog and digital, but sonically instead of materially. So working together has been a really rich exercising in exploring the visual world of music and gaining a greater understanding of the process behind it. It's inspiring to be involved with an artistic medium where collaboration is integral because I so often work by myself. And this is actually a video that we made for one of his songs early in the pandemic called Life Before. So visually representing the spirit of music with an image is really a great challenge, but it can be some of the most rewarding kind of work. Trying to honor someone else's creativity in a non-visual medium is difficult. I use sound as a guide which kind of abstracts my process. It becomes an intuitive exercise of listening. And the artwork for Escalator, a single by Reservoir, draws from the energetic and free instrumentals of the song. I think a lot of the work that I do for musicians is impressionistic and based in both feeling and observation. And I think that music is a great example of one area of my practice that really builds community and relationships. I find that a lot of the musicians who I work with have a similar reverence for nature and details, so it's cool to be able to relate to one another in that way and also relate to one another through complementary mediums. This is Helado Negro's last album, Far In. This is one of the LP sleeves and the LP label. And I've been thinking a lot about how special it is to be able to contribute to this medium that has had such a strong influence on me as a young person and also on my direction in life. I think the best kind of work builds on that mutual admiration and respect for one another, and I find that to be true with most of these projects. I think it makes the process more enjoyable and the results feel true to my sensibility. This is artwork that I made for a podcast for the record label 4AD. I really love the results. They were very open to my experimental approach and to the type being kind of crazy looking, using a very hands-on method and sort of pairing that with a digital approach. Posters that I've made for musicians are some of my favorites. Each one is an opportunity to experiment. These singular explorations can lead to further studies of methods of image making and can provide the foundation for larger projects that nurture the seed of a specific moment. which goes back to this idea of the toolkit and creating a range of approaches to draw from. Often music imagery is totally subjective and open-ended, so it creates a great opportunity to try new things. Which I think is a good transition to speaking about my general approach to things, which is to make things by hand. A lot of the work that I make is to support someone else's creative vision, and I think the best projects provide me with time and space needed to honor that vision, as well as my own process. More than a handmade approach being aesthetically driven, I think it's more about imbuing the work with a sense of spirit and humanity. It's also just entirely my process and way of understanding how to make something. Printing things is a method I use to decipher the work. This aids in seeing how each part interacts with each other compositional piece. Touching and moving each element opens up the way of seeing and breaks the barrier of it being confined to the screen. Most of my work has some element of looseness. I like to draw whenever I can. I think it's fun to create contrast between our intensely digital world and the texture of something handmade. It provides a warmth, it elevates imperfection, grit, organic energy, and ultimately feels like a rewarding way of making things. Last year I was approached by the Cult Classic magazine team to design their 5th issue. It felt like a significant project because of the role that magazines have played in my introduction to culture. It features a roster of people whose creative practices were operating within disciplines that I draw inspiration from. I wanted the design direction of the magazine to include evidence of the hand and use analog techniques like drawing. There's a community feel to the content, and I wanted to draw from zine and independent publishing culture to create a look and feel that had warmth, but also express the sensibility of each subject from article to article. The magazine has a sense of tactility throughout, which I was trying to balance with the bold imagery. I think that there's a balance of that expression, but also giving importance and shine to that content. I love working on a magazine project, and I kind of hope that there's a kid in the suburbs getting excited about it. Some thoughts as we close out. Think a lot about sustainability in terms of my career and lifestyle. What does creating sustainability look like for me as an independent practitioner? What does it mean to maintain a sustainable practice, spiritually, financially, and creatively? Ideally, I'm working on projects that inspire me, but sometimes caring about something can mean that it might be spiritually fulfilling, but maybe doesn't pay much. The perfect job is one where I'm excited about the work, the client is easy to communicate with, and I'm being fairly compensated. To be honest, that's pretty rare. Finding balance is so important and one of the biggest challenges, especially at the beginning. So with time, I learned that no is an extremely valuable word. I think that passion and drive have the potential to be exploited if you aren't constantly checking in with yourself. It's a really delicate balance between maintaining excitement and optimism, and ensuring that you understand the agreement that you're entering with the client. For me, learning about the nitty-gritty business stuff came from experience and making a lot of mistakes. I'm still learning every day, and luckily there are a lot of great online resources to aid in understanding this side of design. And I think making accessible imagery is really the business of graphic design. And I think as designers, we can be tempted to kind of indulge in the impulse of making something that fits into the canon of existing trends or acceptable imagery. The internet really promotes homogeneity as a result of like mood boarding and Pinterest algorithms, which removes work from its original context and makes it consumable on a purely aesthetic level. In other words, sometimes we're encouraged to make work that looks like something that already exists. And I think clients can struggle with visual risk-taking when there's a financial aspect at play. and when there are metrics to show what kind of imagery is palatable to consumers. Creativity can suffer as a result. I have an entire portfolio of unapproved work. And there's really like a fatigue that can result from operating in that system, but I think it serves as encouragement to make work independent of clients or have a dedicated creative practice outside of a job. So in preparation for this talk, I rewatched Virgil Abloh's Harvard lecture, which if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you bookmark it. It was super inspiring for me and provided a lot of really helpful perspectives. He said to have mentors that are alive. I think it's really great advice. I think I've always thought of mentors in a literal sense. Instead, he suggests thinking of someone you admire, whose knowledge is still accessible as a mentor. And that really opened up the way that I think about inspiration and allowed my admiration to transform into something more actionable. Using the knowledge and career of someone whose work you like and digging deeper into the motivation behind it. Their teachings, their opinions, insights, and potentially using what you learn as a foundation for your own practice. Sister Create specifically had a really interesting way of framing her work and approaches for other people to learn from. These rules provide a supportive framework to guide or inspire one's thinking. I recently revisited these rules and found them to be immensely helpful everyday reminders. They're motivating and encourage action. Her teachings are highly applicable to design and really any creative practice. As someone who works alone, it's really helpful to occasionally be disrupted by another person's thinking. It's a good reminder that there's more than one way of doing things and to value my creativity irrespective of its utility and value to clients. I think that the key to staying engaged and inspired is keeping your eyes open, connecting the dots, digging deeper into the things that you identify with, and resting when needed. Doing these things can produce a very unique and individualized approach to your own individual practice. And to close this out, I just wanted to encourage slowing down and allowing yourself the time to look, listen, reflect, and find inspiration. The things that inspire me are what give my work meaning. Thanks, guys.
Before everybody runs out, we do some questions.
Yeah, we still have some time for
If you have to go,
Q&As,
you can go.
so-
Yeah, we've got some time for questions, if anybody has questions. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It might be kind of a silly question, but as a designer who wants to kind of be more informed by culture and the way that you think about work, I guess I had a question on how you kind of define the idea of culture, and how, and another question to that is, would you say that your work is defined in maybe a specific group of cultures, or does it come from like a general appreciation for the idea of culture?
Thanks for your question. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm interested in like mostly artistic disciplines and other creative disciplines like music and fashion and forms of expression, I guess. Like those are the cultural touch points that I'm mostly interested in and inspired by for sure. Yeah.
I really love the amount of physicality in your work. I think that's something that really gets swept under the rug. You know, we all just open an Illustrator file before we start working on a poster. But one thing I've been wondering is, you know, I'm about to graduate and lose access to a lot of, like, the Riso printer and a lot of our physical production supplies. And I don't know, I'm just wondering, as an independent practitioner, what kind of physical resources do you use, or what kinds of places have you found that have been good resources for that physical making?
That's a good question. I think I fall back on the things that are sort of like the easiest for me, like drawing. I don't really need a lot of tools for that. However, I'm still involved in like making objects and like woodworking, and luckily I have like built a community of people where I know someone with a wood shop, which I feel really lucky about, because I actually, getting out of school, was kind of faced with that same reality of like, okay, I don't have any of these tools anymore, what do I do? And I think it sort of forced me to like change a little bit and just like use what I had. But I do think that there are, in most cities, like maker spaces or places with like shared resources where you can kind of like tap someone you know for a Rezo printer, or I don't know, I think there are people who are like open to kind of like sharing the resources that they have. So I think kind of looking into that would be a good place to start. But there is definitely like a bit of a change in not having those things anymore.
Other questions? Go ahead, don't be shy. Raise your hand, speak out.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think brand design works always involve a lot of like dilemma between expressing yourself and helping clients reach their goals. And how do you manage that? Like as you turn to like independent practitioner, like has the work process changed, or yeah?
I think I have to make a lot of compromises. Yeah, I think anytime I make something for a client, at the end of the day, it's not really about my expression, it's about how does my expression aid in communicating the thing that they're trying to say. And so I think there have been a lot of times where I make something that I'm really excited about and it doesn't end up getting approved, and you kind of have to pivot. And sometimes it's for the best, and sometimes I'm a little bit disappointed. And I think that that's kind of like part of the profession, just like learning that that's a reality. I wish it wasn't. I wish I could just be like, I mean, this crazy thing goes through, gets approved, amazing, but unfortunately, like, that's not how it goes. So I think the balance is just sort of like trying to understand their limits a little bit, and maybe having that to consider before you kind of go into the project.
But as you turn independent, like have you become like more picky about your clients? Like,
Yeah. I'm super picky. Yeah.
Something related to with is like, how do you get, like, how's the collaboration between you and your client carries out? Like, what's the avenue of that collaboration, or like, what's the avenue where they just contact you, and then, like, how does that? Because I assume at the very beginning it was really hard to initiate these things, right? So how was that kind of journey?
I guess a lot of people like reach out to me, so there's a lot of, well, I guess I would say that there's like an understanding of my approach to things before engaging me in a project. Sometimes somebody hires me and midway they kind of decide that they want something a little bit less my style, and that becomes difficult. But sorry, what was your question?
Oh,
I'm just talking now.
No, that's I'm just wondering, like, how do you put yourself out there? Is because you had previous work at Marvel, and then that's how you find it to interview, and or there's like.
Yeah, I guess working at Normal and also having like the Bricktown sound posters, which is kind of like how I was able to step out and be independent. And those were like more expressive, and people were like, oh, this is the work that she likes to make. Like, that's interesting to me. Maybe we can work on something together. And I think a lot of times there's like a collaborative process that ensues from that. Sometimes I enter a relationship with the client and it's more like, it's less creative than I think, and it's really kind of a risk when you say yes to something. Like, there's really no way of telling, oh, this person is going to be receptive to my ideas and collaborate and have this sort of equilibrium and like a symbiotic relationship. I think sometimes I say yes to a project and then it's like they're telling me what to do, so it's difficult to maintain that relationship for sure.
We have a question.
You talked about how a lot of times like the meeting with the school bus and then the train, like how constant rejections of ideas bring fatigue. How do you personally get past that?
That's a good question. Honestly, it's difficult because I'm a person and I have feelings, and I'm attached to the work that I make, so I think it's difficult to get over it sometimes, and I think it sort of just pushes me to want to prioritize other things, and maybe after having a client project that like doesn't go my way, I'm like, okay, I need to take a break, and I think that's gonna help me be the best thing for me right now. Maybe working isn't the answer at the moment. I think it's just having like a life balance, honestly, and giving yourself time to get excited about going back to graphic design, because I think it's easy to get burned out when, yeah, you are faced with someone saying, oh, that's not the vibe, and I'm like, well, that makes me sad. So I think, yeah, it's important to rest and important to sort of reintroduce yourself to the things that do make you excited, just to balance that, yeah, rejection factor that can be really difficult. To be honest, by the time I left, I had built up like a really like significant freelance career of like, I don't know, I was just getting bigger jobs at that point, so it was kind of a financial thing where I was like, I feel like I can do this now on my own instead of working at a studio and sort of like having two sources of income. It's like, okay, I think I can do it now, so that's really all it was.
I really enjoyed your message about slow design. I think that's like very important for us to be thinking about, especially like going into the workforce. I think my main kind of question is like, I know you said that you worked in small studios and like ad agencies. I assumed you worked with a group of people and a team. What do you think like you kind of gained and lost in like moving into like working alone? And freelancing alone, because I think it's like we like in our senior class we're working on with like a group, and all our projects are kind of group projects, and I think they both come with like different types of problems and challenges. So like, how do you go about like working on something individually versus like working on something with a group of people? And also, before you say that, answer this question, just a general announcement for everyone. So we're taking Crystal out for dinner. So if anyone wants to or is interested in staying back, we'll kind of figure out like how we'd have a limited number of people who can come. But if you're interested, just stay back after this.
I think working with a group, things move a lot faster because there are more minds at work and trying to find a solution. I really miss that, to be honest with you. Like, working alone, I think the process is just a little bit slower, and I kind of take a long time to like meditate on something and think about something for a long time before actually entering the design process at times. So I don't know, I really do miss like working with a group. I think there's so much to be gained from that. But I do have a lot of freedom in just like doing what I want. I guess that's the benefit to being independent. Yeah.
Go ahead, Shannon. You be the last one. Last question.
Related to what you mentioned about like the Bricktown music posters, I really liked what you were discussing, your avenues of like exploration, how you were able to explore independent style passions for each one, especially because it was such a reoccurring poster. And set of graphics, I think that's something that like I personally struggle with, just like finding new inspiration and just keeping up with like a cycle of like timelines. So I was just wondering if you have any advice for people that do want to sort of like build that like toolkit almost, like not just skill wise but mentally, and how to like open your mind to new inspirations the way that you're doing.
Well, I think a project like Bricktown like really changed my life in that way, like having this repetitive thing that did have parameters but creatively didn't have a lot of limits, but I had information that I had to lay out, I had a deadline that I had to make, but just having that like loose set of boundaries sort of like let me, I don't know, approach the poster in whatever way I wanted, and they never made a single correction for me, which I think sort of allowed me to like get a little bit crazier and crazier as time went on. Like, I don't know if I would ever have gotten to the point where I was like dancing in a room by myself, like filming myself, like making an S, if I had had some like creative boundaries in place. So I don't know, I think finding a project like that where maybe there's like a bar that's doing some like night where they need a graphic designer and like don't really have a lot of creative input, like could be a really helpful project for you in this stage. And I think just like, yeah, researching and keeping your eyes open and just kind of asking yourself what you're interested in and sort of approaching your graphic design practice with like that interest, or like even if it's like cooking or knitting or whatever it is, I think that all of those things have value when it comes to working as a graphic designer too. So just trying to find the relationship, I think, is really, really helpful. Hopefully that answers your question. All right.
Thank you, Krista.